Tansin itute magtiar Wheatley in the Sigasun o Pasquia Gucci. Tawau, welcome to APTN National News. At an Ottawa press conference, the Carney government announced $1.6 billion in new funding Thursday afternoon, so that the Jordan's Principle program will continue through to the end of March 2027. The program is supposed to ensure First Nations children receive the same services as non-First Nations, regardless of where they live. It is named after Jordan River Anderson, a First Nations boy who died in hospital at the age of 5 in 2005, when the federal and Manitoba governments argued over who should pay for his home-based care. Indigenous Services Minister Mandy Galmasti explained what the new funding will do.
This renewal will provide immediate stability and allows communities to continue delivering services with confidence. I know that the past few months has created much uncertainty for families. We've had the opportunity to speak with them and collaborate with them, and looking at what we are going to be doing with the future of Jordan's Principle. This first step is announcing this critical funding and creating the stability that they need.
And at their own press conference in Winnipeg, reaction to the Jordan's Principle funding announcement was swift from the Assembly of Manitoba Grand Chief Kyra Wilson and Manitoba Kiwetanui Ugamaganuk Grand Chief Garrison Settee. Grand Chief Wilson says the $1.6 billion funding is a reduction from the $1.9 billion that was promised. Wilson says she is hopeful that Canada is moving in the right direction in ensuring that First Nations children are being prioritized, but she is unsure of what services the federal government will be addressing. Both Grand Chiefs are worried about the 140,000 cases of Jordan's Principle backlog, of which 25,000 are considered urgent. Settee stated that reevaluating how support is distributed would allow the funding to be better used. Wilson says that until the federal government decides to come to the table and sit with First Nation leaders and communities, mistakes will continue to be made.
What I would say is that the federal government continues to make decisions based off of what our needs are as First Nations families and communities, and they still have yet to actually talk to us about what is the implementation of Jordan's Principle, what are the guidelines, what are the standards, and actually how much money is required to ensure that our children are meeting the basic needs and necessities for a good life. And really right now, we don't have that information.
A First Nation in British Columbia wants to know how an oil spill could occur within their traditional territory and why the company responsible downplayed the incident. APTN's Tina House has this story.
On January the 2nd, 2026, 1,800 liters of oil was spilled into the ocean near the Sunemu First Nation, and the community leadership want answers.
Things are going to happen, unfortunately, in life and but things that are preventable really hits the heart.
William Yoakum is a councillor for the Sunemu First Nation. He's frustrated that a local company, Environmental 360 Solutions, was found responsible for a diesel oil spill, and they've downplayed what happened.
Ironically, they admitted to the oil spill, and then to the government, the provincial government, and then we get finally, after the thought, we get wind of this, which is not the way business should be done. But nevertheless, when we do get wind of it, they like in denial, almost like we don't know what you're talking about.
When the spill was noticed by members of the public, C-SPAN, a shipping company that was within the vicinity of the spill, took immediate action and deployed booms to contain the oil. After further investigation, it was determined that the oil came from this drainage pipe leading from Environmental 360 Solutions into the Pacific Ocean. We tried to do an interview with the company, but were unsuccessful. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans closed off this section highlighted in pink, which is between Gabriola Island and the city of Nanaimo. However, after the Sunemu First Nation conducted testing, they have since reopened the area for harvesting clams and other seafood.
I think about the old people that lived off this. They didn't have a grocery store down the road. This was their grocery store. And we're trying to preserve and make it so it can one day get sort of similar. We'll never be able to get it the way it was, but we want to get it to the way where people can have a livelihood, whether it's for commerce or for personal, for feeding their family.
For Yoakum, He says he just wants industry to be transparent when they are doing business within their territory, and they have a long list for the government to follow up on in this matter.
What Nanaimo is asking for the governments to do is immediate enforcement and investigation, full environmental impact assessments, transparent disclosures of environmental data, comprehensive remediation and habitat restoration, accountability for regulatory non-compliance, meaningful engagement with Nanaimo as rights holders, and restoration of treaty obligations.
We reached out to the Ministry of Environment, but did not hear back by the time this story went to air. Tina House, APTN National News, Nanaimo First Nation.
Kinanaskamitin Tina. Detecting, deterring, and if required, defending Canada's Arctic takes long-term planning and careful coordination with communities. That's the message of the latest major military exercise north of 60. In the first part of a two-part series, Charlotte Morit-Jacobs gives us a look at how troops are training to uphold Canadian sovereignty.
100 kilometers west of Yellowknife, soldiers are securing the Edzo airfield from possible enemy saboteurs. Thankfully, it's a mock scenario, one of many training exercises in Operation Nanook Nunalivut. Signal operator Nigel Gates' job is command and control. Using VHF radio, he makes sure everyone's aware of what's going on at all times.
One of the challenges is always just going to be equipment in the cold. Like some of our wires are just frozen solid, so you always have to bring spares to ensure that you can maintain communications while out in the field, because you're expected to provide communications 24/7 with HQ, with the soldiers, so everyone stays connected and situational awareness is maintained. In the trade, we call that command and control, making sure that everyone's just aware of what's going on all the time.
Gates keeps in communication with the armored vehicles, some of which are at a checkpoint. In addition, observation posts and additional patrols in the area work to ensure this critical piece of infrastructure is secure, in coordination with the community, which was still using the airfield throughout the operation.
How do we find the people? We use technology, but a big part of it is we use our own skills, and that's where we can push people out with patrolling, and that's why we need to practice surviving out here without the infrastructure to support us. The flights that we were securing in the airstrip, they did manage to get off.
Lieutenant Colonel Bryn Wright says the extreme conditions mean soldiers are not only learning how to operate new equipment, but also how to maintain it.
There's the training of what you do as infantry soldiers, and that's protecting equipment. And it doesn't matter whether it's here in Edzo, 100 kilometres outside of Yellowknife, or far up north. Security is security. The training in the cold is you crawl, walk, run. So we're crawling, so we've trained the troops. Then we're going to move further north and get better and stronger, and our abilities get better.
For many of the troops from Alberta who comprise Task Force Grizzly, completing the exercise is a learning experience, and the first time they've been in the territories.
Like our stove watch and everything, we'd like to keep our lighters nice and warm, keep it safe with us, because in this extreme cold, they will not light, so we need to keep our lighters warm with us, in our pockets, hand warmers.
Nigel House and Weaselhead Kewen have been friends since basic training and can add canvas tent camping in -50 and patrolling in the bush with skis, snowshoes, and snowmobiles to their skill sets, learning from other Indigenous members like the local Canadian Rangers.
Basically, we call it snowcrete. It's basically just snow, piled on top of snow, more snow, water. If possible, to get some gravel, if possible. Mix that in a bit, same thing, just layer, compress, water, snow, compress, and then you'll have your little makeshift defensive position.
Since 2007, the annual Operation Nanook has been held in various destinations across the territories. And this year, the 2-month event is the largest to date, with up to 1,300 Canadian Armed Forces members taking part alongside allied military personnel from the United States, Belgium, France, and Denmark. Amid a changing geopolitical environment, new defense strategies and budgets are shifting priorities to Arctic sovereignty and northern defense. Stay tuned for part 2 of Operation Nanook to see how logistics and strategy come together to test equipment for the first time in the tundra. Charlotte Mort Jacobs, APTN National News, EDSO, Northwest Territories.
Tapwagich, Charlotte. And we talk cartels in Mexico and the drug crisis here at home with our Truth and Politics panel next. That's right after the break. Cheskwa. Come on in, Pete Degue. Tranquility of Puerto Vallarta, Mexico was shattered by gunfire and arson as members of a drug cartel reacted violently to the killing of their leader by federale authorities. Flights into the resort city were canceled or turned around in midair to avoid the conflict, and tourists already there holed up inside their hotel rooms. Our Truth and Politics panel is here to shed some light on the effects of these events. With us, as always, are Jennifer Leowitz, the CEO of Pasqua Strategies, and Nigon Sinclair, a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Thanks to you both as always. Nigon, let's start with you. There was violence in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. What comes to mind when you see and hear all of these news reports of a gang leader killed by police and the ensuing gun battles? What else do you see?
So the gang leader that was killed was in charge of what's called the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or the JNGC. Now, what people may not know is that the JNGC has been terrorizing and murdering indigenous peoples for years, the Nayara people, the Wixárika people, the Michigan people, the Odam people. Oftentimes these cartels are in the forests. They're in the sort of rural areas. Many of those is farmlands or traditional territories of indigenous peoples. And what happens is those indigenous peoples are caught in the crossfires of what is often a big conflict between the state and the cartels. And in this case, this cartel in particular has been particularly nasty, even attaching explosives to young children to test them before using them on the army. And on top of that, of course, there's the Mexican government, which continues to build resource development projects that impact indigenous peoples as well. Indigenous leaders are regularly found murdered in Mexico. And so as we are thinking about our relatives, those snowbirds that go down to Mexico for vacations, I just hope that you know that this is an everyday occurrence for indigenous peoples to experience violence from the cartel.
And I guess, Jennifer, we all know that the methamphetamine and fentanyl, cocaine and crack cocaine, they're inundating our communities with addiction and overdoses and even murders. Is it much of a stretch to connect our violence, our drug-fueled loss of life up here with what is happening in Mexico and South America?
I think it's kind of hard for us to connect it in a way that we don't feel that, very big, heavy drug cartel violence in our streets as much as you would in a place like Mexico. Obviously, what we're seeing happen there right now kind of creates a lot of uncertainty, especially for tourists. And that's where I feel the direct connection is. It's obviously not a place that I want to visit right now because it doesn't feel safe. But we feel the direct effects of what large-scale organized crime, especially drug dealing, looks like on the ground. There is obviously big shipments and movements of drugs happening every single day, and that's the really high level piece. But what happens on the ground, especially in our communities, is the suffering and the loss and the struggle and the breakdown of family and everything that happens because of drug use. And so I feel like personally that's what I feel more of, is I don't see the high level organized crime. I see the direct result of that and how this is a large scale business for a lot of these really bad people. But on the ground, we're left with the effects of that. And I think it's, it's getting worse. And I think it's going to continue getting worse until we start, cracking down on it and figuring out every different angle of how it's coming into the country. And also on the other end of things, putting in every resource that we have to addressing the addiction crisis.
And Nigan, I guess your take on that, what do you think, is there a connection to both?
Undoubtedly, we are living in communities that are in the echoes and the throes and the residues of residential schools, of the issues of longstanding poverty, which lead to health crises, and the way that people most oftentimes deal with health crises, mental health crisis in particular, is to self-medicate, to use drugs to try to escape. I never fault someone for using drugs or alcohol. I certainly understand it. What we need to provide is better options for individuals who are going through experiences of trauma and experiencing those traumas often on a lifelong basis. And so the problem, of course, is that the drug trade is a very profitable trade. It's oftentimes ostracized. It's not often even taxed. And so what ends up happening is that it's kind of in the depths, in the dark alleys, in the small corners of society. And those are often the small corners where many of our people end up. And so in those places, we need to make sure that there's better offerings for our peoples instead of facing turning to drugs. And that means that we have to give better what's often called wraparound support. So we have to give people options. We have to give them hope. We have to give them opportunity to learn language and culture. Language and culture is always the key to be able to deal with the long-standing traumas which lead to addiction. And our languages, our cultures, the rebuilding of our nations will always be the methods in which our peoples will become the strongest and most full, robust people that we can become. So we really have to build all of those systems up, and we have to at the same time control these incoming drugs from places like Mexico, but then also from the United States as well.
And I guess, Jennifer, there isn't always easy solutions or whatnot, but what do you think we could do to help the Indigenous people in Mexico in this instance?
Well, that's, a really hard question to answer because it's always up to whether or not our federal government is willing to essentially give that help. Obviously, that gets into the realm of foreign affairs and policy related to that. I think one thing that we can do is remember that when we are traveling, that we are traveling to places where there is still a lot of corruption in governments. Not saying, I want to be careful what I say in regards to that for, everybody's safety, but it's one of these things that Canadians have to remember, and it's not just immune to like drug cartels that exist in Mexico. It's even so much as Canadians that are traveling to places like Hawaii, especially after natural disasters, where we take in the beautiful parts that these places have to offer. And I think sometimes we forget that there is still very real issues that exist in these places, from poverty and really high level organized crime and all of those things. And I think that's one thing to keep in mind. I would love to visit a place like Hawaii one day, but it's, the indigenous people to that place often talk about how like the tourism takes away from things like their water resources and everything like that. We have to remember that. And if you are traveling to places that seem very, very cheap, often there is a very cheap labor industry in order to give you that cheap cost to visit those places. So I think we just have to keep reminding ourselves of that and be cautious, be incredibly cautious when you're traveling. If the federal government is giving you warnings, it's not normally just to scare you. It's so that they can prevent, us getting stuck in places like this and them having to intervene. So
Absolutely, some good points there. I just want to thank you both today for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And we check in with our colleagues over at Nation to Nation and Investigates. That's right after this break. Cheskwa. Tawau, welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. It was a decent haul of fish over the weekend by one of our editors here at APTN. Wilfred enjoyed his day on the ice on Shoal Lake, and in case you were wondering, this fish was returned to the water. Send your photos to share at aptn.ca for your chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, St. John's 1, Fredericton also 1. Over to Nain, -15, Inukjuak, -19. We have Saguenay at -4, Val-d'Or, -1. Over to North Bay, +1, Sault Ste. Marie 3. Over to Sioux Lookout, 0, and Thunder Bay at 4 degrees. Up to Churchill, -29, Puckatawagan, -18. Barons River, -3, Brandon, -1. Over to Yorkton, -4, Swift Current, also -4. Up to Stony Rapids, -25, La Ronge, -17. Moving west, Grand Prairie, -17, Peace River, -19. Edmonton, -16, Lethbridge, -1. Over to Tofino, +5, Vancouver, 6. Dease Lake, -13, Smithers, -2. Up to Rock River, -23, Whitehorse, -22. Over to Yellowknife, -28, Norman Wells, -27. Up to Tuktoyaktuk, -24, Cova Lake, -31. Cambridge Bay, -22, Baker Lake, -24. Up there in Resolute, -31, and Igloolik, -37. Apologies to Tofino for getting the weather wrong. I stumbled to stay humble. And now Fraser Needham drops by to tell us what's ahead on Nation to Nation right after this newscast.
The Szechuan First Nation in Northern Ontario have been without safe drinking water for 2 months. Anishinaabe Aski Nation Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler is here to talk about the situation. Parliament back in session, Conservatives have been pushing the government on First Nations water legislation and more. We talked to Conservative MP Jamie Schmale about this and other pressing Indigenous issues. And Tennille Johnson is the first Indigenous person to seek the leadership of the federal NDP. She's here to talk about her campaign. All this ahead on Nation to Nation.
The 2025 Manitoba wildfires had a devastating impact on many communities throughout the province. But what happens after the smoke clears? Coming up this week on an all-new episode of APTN Investigates, Tamara Pimentel travels to the small northern town of Leaf Rapids to assess the damage. With infrastructure and services needs at an all-time high, community members are left sifting through the ashes. Here's a preview now.
For years, the residents of Leaf Rapids have been calling for change. And you can see why. Driving down the quiet streets, it seems most homes are uninhabitable. Some vandalized, some completely burned down, either from arson or wildfires. The effects of a failed economy and diminishing services has put a strain on this small community. But for nearly 300 people, it's still home.
I grew up here. I've been here since 2003. And I've seen how much has disappeared as I've grown.
Most of Irvin Biggety's family moved away. When a wildfire stormed the town of Leaf Rapids last summer, it was a blow to an already crumbling community. The house his mother lived in became condemned.
Oh yeah, this door's open. Yeah, you'll see some of the condition of my mom's house. When she got home, inside, the room was covered in mold and the ceiling caved in. It always happens though, this is, my mom says, she's used to it. She's used to us losing stuff. It's what's been happening for years to us. We always lose our stuff.
You can catch APTN Investigates Ashes to Ashes airing this Saturday on APTN. And that's your APTN National News for this Thursday, February 26th. I'm TR Wheatley. It's been a pleasure to be here with you. Join Dennis Ward tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. Until then, from all of us at APTN to all of you, Agase, Gitam, Gigawapamitanana.